Hello. I want to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. For a moment, I want you to think about it's a beautiful Saturday in the fall and you don't have anything on your schedule, so what do you choose to do? Maybe you tackle some home improvement projects that you've had on the list for quite some time. Maybe you go outside and enjoy the beautiful weather and you take a hike or spend some time sitting in the backyard reading a book. Maybe you have every intention of just sitting on the couch with a remote control in your hand and watching 13 hours of football. In our home, every now and then, Trista will look at me and she'll say, I know it's Saturday, but we need to go to the mall. And she's not talking about the mall here in town. She's talking about driving to Birmingham or to Atlanta to go to the mall. And I always go, but I don't go to shop. I go to watch people. The bigger the mall, the more people, the better. And while Trista makes her way from store to store, getting the things that she needs, I kind of lollygag behind, just watching how people interact with each other. For me, it's kind of therapeutic because in less than 15 minutes of watching people, I go from feeling kind of bad about my personal situation to realizing that I'm doing really, really well. The modern mall was developed by J.C. Nichols. The Country Club Plaza first opened in Kansas City, Missouri in 1922. It's still in operation today. Mr. Nichols revolutionized our shopping experience by putting several different types of stores in a central location, but he's not the only person that heavily influenced your shopping practices. Following World War I, Sylvan Goldman and his brother operated several successful grocery wholesalers. And after a trip to California, they converted their wholesalers into what we call grocery stores or supermarkets. They sold several different types of food items, but they allowed the customers to serve themselves. One day, Mr. Goldman noticed how the women in the store were struggling carrying the food basket and carrying their children. So he had the idea to enlist a local mechanic, Fred Young, and they put wheels and two baskets on the frame of a folding chair, and he called it the shopping cart. Now, we're in the middle of a study on Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, and you're probably wondering, what do shopping malls and grocery carts have to do with our text? And we're going to get there, but we probably need to do a little more research and discussion before we get to this idea. So hold on to the ideas of malls and shopping carts. We'll circle back to them. I want you to remember the passage that we're focusing on, we see that Paul is setting up boundaries so that we can find joy and peace in this life. He writes, finally, brothers and sisters, fill your minds with beauty and truth. Meditate on whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good, whatever is virtuous and praiseworthy. Paul has established a few boundaries to help us find peace. And today we're going to talk about filtering all of our thoughts through the boundary of what is pure. And honestly, this one might hurt a little bit. You see, I took some time this week to sit down and to think about what the filter in my life is accomplishing. And I asked myself some questions that I want to ask you. But since you're there all by yourself, it's just you and God, maybe you can find the space to be honest. And so the first question I have is, what kind of magazines and books are you reading? The second question is, if we were to look through your internet search history, what websites would we discover? Third, what kind of movies are you streaming on Netflix or Max or Amazon Prime or Hulu? Fourth, regardless of the type of music you're listening to, what kind of lifestyle does that music celebrate? Last question. Can you remember the punchline of the last joke that you laughed at? Today we're going to look at this fourth boundary that Paul offers us that allows us to experience real freedom and peace. The boundary says that we have all of this freedom to fill our minds with whatever is pure. If we want to experience the peace of God which surpasses all understanding, if we want to guard our hearts and our minds, then we need to think, contemplate, visualize on things that are pure, innocent, wholesome, clean, and holy. I'm not sure if you've noticed or not, but thinking pure thought seems to get more difficult every passing year. Our culture continues to drift, and it's getting harder to meditate on things that are pure because, well, it seems like everything around us is so impure. Actually, if I were a betting man, I'd wager that there are some things in your life that used to shock you, used to offend you or make you blush, and now those things don't even register. Our culture has done a really good job pushing against our boundaries to the point that we're desensitized to impurity. We watch television shows or movies and we barely even notice the violence anymore. This summer, the Disney company, the children's company, released a movie that had more blood and gore in it than all of the war movies released in the 1980s. And nobody really said anything about it. Nobody really cares about the storyline anymore. All you got to do is get you a character that has some buzz. You put together some special effects, a few good explosions, show a little blood, get you a creative title, and you can have your own box office success. But it's not just violence and gore that we've become numb to. We've grown pretty comfortable with sexual impurity as well. Thanks to the smartphone that you probably got 6 feet from you at the most, pornography is available in the palm of your hand anytime that you want it, 24 hours a day. Evening television shows make the traditional family a punchline to their joke. Homosexual relationships are considered more common than healthy heterosexual marriages. Adultery is common to the point that it's just assumed if you're single and young, you're going to be sexually active. Okay, we could actually just get rid of those two modifiers. It's assumed even if you're old and married that you're going to be having an affair. The lines marking the boundaries between appropriate and inappropriate language has been withdrawn, if not completely erased. Words that once were reserved for sailors out at sea are now routinely heard coming from primetime television characters, top 20 songs, presidential candidates, regardless of your party's affiliation. All of the things that used to bring us to a stop when we heard them are now not really even a minor speed bump. They don't slow us down. We don't really even notice them. We are constantly being bombarded with worldly thoughts and languages and ideas, and our culture is drowning in filth, and honestly, some of it is bound to rub off on us. My mom taught me very early in life that if you go out and spend some time in the mud, you're going to track dirt in the house. Even Solomon understood that purity is impossible to maintain. In Proverbs 20, verse 9, he says, "Who can say I have kept my heart pure? I am clean without sin." And while it's true, the Bible often confronts us with the fact of sin, that doesn't mean that it accepts sin as our inevitable fate. The Bible calls us to a higher way of living. While we live in this impure culture, and it's true that if we're not careful, we'll drift into the easy thing and act like the world, God calls us to something better. We need to remember that at the moment that we accept our culture's standards, that's the moment we stop being the people of God, which is exactly what Paul feared when he raised this issue with a young minister named Titus who was working with Christians in Crete. Listen to his instructions. "And we are instructed to turn from godless living and sinful pleasures. We should live in this evil world with wisdom, righteousness, and devotion to God while we look forward with hope to that wonderful day when the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, will be revealed. He gave his life to free us from every kind of sin, to cleanse us, to make us his very own people, totally committed to doing good deeds." Now, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds into this text. I'm hoping for us to circle back and study the book of Titus together. But I want to share a few things that I believe Paul wanted you to know. First, he wants you to know that grace is a teacher. It's not a license to do whatever you want. Grace sets a pretty high standard. It makes stringent demands and requires careful living. Grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. It teaches us to say yes to self-controlled godly living. Secondly, regardless of what the culture accepts, God expects his people to live godly lives. Paul told Titus that we're to live a life in this evil world, a godly life. Regardless of how dirty the environment is, God calls us to keep our hearts and our minds pure. Thirdly, Jesus gave his life to make us pure. Every time that you and I expose our hearts to impure things, we're attempting to undo the work of the cross. So what does Paul expect when he teaches us to meditate on whatever is pure? This is where I want us to go back to the shopping mall and the shopping cart. The culture we live in is kind of like a mall. There are all these wonderful and exciting things about the world and the culture where God has placed us. Our world is beautifully designed, well landscaped, and filled with friendly people. Honestly, I love our culture. Now, there are things about it that I struggle with, some rotten things. But in a moment of struggle, we get to see the best of America and the best that our people have to offer. It's this grand mall of ideas and images, sights and sounds, lifestyles and customs. And you and I are pushing a shopping cart right down the aisles of this cultural mall. And the shopping cart is our heart, our mind, and our soul. And on each side of the aisle, there are all of these shops and stores and boutiques, and we can wander into any one of them and fill our carts with as much as they can hold. So here's the definition of purity. Purity means that you only put into your cart ideas and images, sights and sounds, lifestyles and customs that bring honor to God. Okay, I'm going to meddle here for a moment. Guys, I want you to take a look at what you've been putting in your shopping cart. What are the images and things that you're putting into your heart and your mind? What sights and sounds reside there? We know that God designed men and women to complement one another, which means that we are not the same. For example, men are visually oriented. Have you ever noticed that there are dozens of men's magazines and thousands upon thousands of men's websites that are filled with women in various stages of undress? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're selling cars or boots or fishing tackle or Doritos. Advertising companies know that sex sells, and they use women to hawk their products. Ever since Genesis chapter 2, when God brought Eve to Adam, men have longed to look at women. So a man's number one stimulus are the things that he sees. It's all about visual stimulation. So when we're talking about purity and we're pushing our shopping cart through the mall of the culture, the question for men is, what images are you putting into your cart? Do those images honor God? And the struggle is everywhere. A few days ago, Tristan and I, we were sitting on the couch watching a football game that was being played in Florida. As you can imagine, the weather in Florida was perfect. But what I noticed was that every time there was a break in the game, the television cameras would scan across some of the college co-eds in the student section. Most of them were wearing outfits that looked like they bought them at a lingerie store. And I turned to Trista and I said, I thought that was called underwear. And she replied, no, apparently it's called all you wear. Just because it's being offered by our culture, that doesn't mean we get to use it as a crutch. We have a responsibility to keep our minds pure, to keep things that don't belong in our shopping cart out. Regardless of what other people choose to do, we're responsible for ourselves. We get to make the choice about what store we're shopping in and what we're allowing in the shopping carts of our minds and our souls and our hearts. Too often we want to make the same excuse that Adam made back in Genesis 3. He said, God, I sinned because the woman you gave me. In other words, God, I'm not in control. God, it's not my fault. But God reminded him that it was his choice. No one forced him to sin. What Adam did was ultimately between him and God. In the same way, whatever you have in your shopping cart is between you and God. So you probably need to put forth the effort to guard it. Now, while I haven't done the research, my general observation is that there aren't too many women's magazines or women's websites that are filled with men in various stages of undress. Most women aren't visually oriented. Their stimulation comes from other areas. If they had a store in the mall called Victor's Secrets, I doubt that women would be slowly walking past the windows, fighting the temptation to sneak a glance at the posters or the mannequins in the windows. Women aren't visually stimulated, they're emotionally stimulated. If men are drawn by what we see, women are drawn by what they feel. That's why women who are walking through the mall of culture, they need to be careful about what things or how things make them feel. Because one minute you're minding your own business, and the next minute you meet the guy, and he's actually everything you've ever wanted in a man. He's sensitive and he's strong. He's caring and convicted. He's funny and serious, confident and humble. He's a leader, take charge, but he also serves. He's gentle but firm, frugal but likes to shop. Every time he walks into a room, babies smile and dogs wag their tails and the flowers begin to bloom like spring. And he gives off this air that he's not only fiercely protective, but what he really wants to do is just sit on the couch and listen to your day and listen to you talk for hours. He's got your full attention. And then you go home, and who do you find taking a nap in the recliner? It just doesn't seem to measure up. Actually, in some ways, I think it might be easier for men to stay pure than women. Most people would tell you, it's wrong, or you should at least be embarrassed if someone else knew that you were visiting those websites, or you bought those magazines, or you watched those shows. But what's wrong with wanting a connection in a conversation? What's wrong with wanting a relationship? What's wrong with what you feel? For men, it's all about the images that we put into our minds. It's about what we see. Men have to be like Job, who made a covenant with his eyes not to look at a young maiden in lust. For women, it's about where you invest your heart. Women have to make a covenant with your minds. For both of us, it's about purity. It's about what you're putting into your shopping cart. And I think this is probably a good place for us to get ready to head to the table. I would imagine there are some folks who are watching today that if you've made it this far, you're feeling kind of rotten about yourself. Whether it was intentional or not, we recognize that we filled our minds and our hearts with things that just don't belong there. We've sacrificed our innocence. Actually, we've sold our innocence for something that will never bring us the hope and the joy that we long for. Have you ever gone to the grocery store and you've gotten one of those grocery carts that has a broken wheel? The carts that pull really hard to the left, or is missing some rubber off one of the wheels so it doesn't roll as much as it just kind of thumps down the aisle? When you've noticed that you've gotten a broken grocery cart, what do? If you're smart, you trade it in for a better one. As we go to the tables this morning, that's what I want to encourage you to do today. I want you to take your old cart, the one that you have filled with all of this junk and this filth, and I want you to give it to Christ. As we take the bread and we take the cup, we find Jesus at the table who longs to take that old grocery cart and to give us a brand new one. Because he has already given his life on the cross of Calvary, today we have the chance to start over. And this time, we need to strive to be more careful about what we put into the cart of our mind and our heart as we spend our life finding the joy and the peace that comes from meditating on whatever is pure.